A statistic that that never gets any less shocking is that suicide is the single biggest killer of men under the age of 45. Men account for 75% of all suicides. There are so many more statistics which we will get into today. But what we're also going to do is we're going to place those numbers on a human scale, and we're going to talk to some courageous and brilliant people who are bringing awareness to these issues, and also people who have first-hand experience of tackling some of these really difficult, thorny issues. There is all kinds of pressure on men to not express their emotions, not express their feelings in a variety of different ways, and that has often very acute consequences. And we're talking today about perhaps the most acute circumstance that a man or a person could bring themselves to, which is taking their own life. Johnny, I want to start asking you. I mentioned your documentary and the story that you've been on. You say in the documentary at one point that one of the reasons that you found it difficult to come forwards and talk about the things that you were struggling with was this fear of disappointing people. How much do you think that fear of disappointment had to do with being a man?
Even as a little boy, I was quite different. I used to cry a lot, I was very sensitive, and that was all right when I was a little boy. But then there reached a certain point, people used to say to me, okay, you're a big boy now, stop crying. When I was really young, I went with my dad to watch football. I learned that was the only really safe place that men could show their emotions. When we came out the stadium, the mask went on and that armor came back on. And it wasn't safe to cry, and it wasn't safe to be vulnerable, and it wasn't safe to show emotion in public. So when the depression really hit around my mid-teens, I was like, I cannot be showing this to anyone.
I grew up with a dad who's a builder, my brother's a builder, all my best mates are like carpenters or tradesmen, proper men, and I was always a bit different. I was, like Johnny said, I was a bit more of a sensitive kid. But I still was a lad, I still did everything that lads did together. And then I kind of got into advertising, and it was quite a high-pressured environment, and doing lots of late nights, lots of partying, lots of just being a youngster in London, basically. Started to cry a lot. I used to take myself into the cubicles at work and cry and not really understand why I was crying. And then I started, and then it went into insomnia and asking a lot of philosophical questions about what's the purpose of life and etc. But instead of discussing these issues that I was having, I basically just drowned them in alcohol and drugs and partying and trying to be a lad. And it took an accident for me to confront my own problems, and my partner found my medication because I'd hid it from her. We talked about it, and just from talking to her about it, the weight started to just lift off my shoulders, and then we thought, well, for just one personal conversation, if that's how good it feels, imagine what how good it would feel just telling the world about these issues and problems that I've been having. So then we made a theatre show about it and toured it around Australia and the UK, and ever since I did that, I'm able to just sit here in front of strangers and talk about the fact that mental illness is real, and the first step of getting yourself into a better place is by just opening your mouth and speaking the truth and being honest with how you feel.
My family, a military family, we don't do emotions at all. So when I first started experiencing depression, I didn't know what it was, I didn't have anyone to speak to, and very much like yourself, I kind of created this faux masculinity of going out and getting drunk and doing what I thought men my age did, when actually I just was a little bit broken. I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I couldn't talk to anyone until I found just going online and talking to people who wanted to talk and reading stories. I mean, it was only until I started reading stories of other people's experiences that I could go, that sounds familiar, or, oh, I'm a little bit mad like that as well. And that really helped. And then I started actually writing about my own troubles and the problems that I'd gone through, and then getting responses from people saying, I've been through very similar situations. Thank you for writing this. I didn't think anyone else was feeling like this. And I think that communication is necessary for men, because without it, we just don't know what to do. We need to know that other people in our status and our peers can feel like this. I think it's very rare for men to be able to sit down the pub and go, oh, do you know what, I've been feeling really depressed and dejected and I've had a couple of issues I need to talk about. They don't. They talk about the football or women or whatever they want to talk about. It's not a subject that we brought up in normal conversation amongst men. Whilst I found on Twitter that people are a lot more willing to be open. And
kind of when I set Calm up as a pilot and then as a charity, I was first off just really nonplussed about why is there no money available for this?
Yeah.
And why when we're talking about suicide are we not talking about men? And it took me, I think, probably about 2 years to realise that we weren't talking about men because that was embarrassing. Because by definition, somebody who is depressed, well, female, then that's sad, and you can think about that. Pretty young girl, good. We can talk about that. But for a guy to be depressed and to then take his life, that was just sad. And so the media didn't really want to talk about that unless we were going to actually unearth a long, sad story and put it in a woman's magazine and break people's hearts, and we could all get off on the emotion. And it took a long time in my head to realise that the reason that people didn't want to talk about it is because real men, obviously, are invulnerable and should be invulnerable. And if they're not, then they're not a real man. We could only really talk about it if they were under 18 or if they had some other additional thing about them that made them okay for funders or for the media to talk about. And what we've seen in the last 5 years, particularly in the last 2 years, rapidly, is quite a big cultural change. And lots of discussion around gender and men and suicide, and that's been brilliant. The thing is that the suicide numbers for men aren't changing that very much. Since 1981, the suicide rate for women has pretty much halved. The big question is it just culture? And what do we know about these suicides? Because the cultural thing has been a guess. It's an assumption based upon what I've seen, which is that people don't want to talk about sad men because really they're not real men. The stats and the information that's out there is theory. There's a massive amount of theory and things about, well, men are braver, or they've got some kind of gene. There's damn all. And what surprised me recently was trying to say to a whole bunch of people within the industry, why don't we ask for and push for research into male suicide and ask the question? And the pushback on that I found quite shocking. Why would we? It's complex, it's difficult, men just don't go and ask for help. So why would we research it? In 2012, the government put 1.5 million into researching suicide, and not one penny of that went into men. When I asked, the response back was men drink more, they take risky behaviour, they don't go and see their GP. So why would I put any money into it, Jane? It's damn hard as a man to admit any kind of vulnerability, because it's always women and children first, and actually if you're a man, you are supposed to be in control. The time has come for men to be angry about depictions of men and masculinity, and to demand that they have the same freedom that I have, which is I will choose to define myself how I am, and damn any gender assumptions. And I'm speaking as a pretty hardline feminist. We own and are able to occupy all of these areas. So we're sensitive souls, we're artistic, we're good at communication, we're nurturing, we can express ourselves, we can be a lumberjack, we can be a prime minister, we can be all of these things, and we can stay at home. Actually, guys don't have that same freedom. The power of stories, and the power of stories from peers, from people you look up to, is immensely powerful. So I think the footballers talking about abuse over the last few days is going to make a massive difference to a lot of people out there, not just young boys, but other men, other middle-aged men. Now more than ever, the time is there to make and push for real long-term change. But government and nobody's going to put any research into the issue until we rattle that cage really hard and really persistently.